There are places on our planet so creepy that they can terrify even the most seasoned enthusiast. Some of them make your blood run cold, while others can drive you insane. And so ahead are the scariest places on our planet. Barbary Psychiatric Hospital in Philadelphia. Known as the hospital with the most gruesome tragic fate. Originally built as a small farm, it soon became the last refuge for the most hopeless patients expelled from other hospitals. These people no longer had a chance of ever leaving the Barbara. It should come as no surprise that from the mid-20th century onward, the incurable mentally ill were more than plentiful and the hospital began to be in unprecedented demand. But with so many, often extremely aggressive people who committed sometimes the most serious crimes in their lives, the hospital had no chance to cope in a civilized way. Workers, after visiting the asylum, told of how patients, most of whom were completely naked, clung to each other out of fear and cold, defecated directly on the floor, which in no way affected the feelings of the specially selected, completely callous staff. The same horrors continued year after year. Some patients reported being chained to their beds for months on end. Others described the inhuman torture to which the most violent and unruly were subjected. One person was dismembered and hidden in the hospital, and the murderer was never found. Many have also mentioned the frequent appearance of ghosts on the hospital grounds, the souls of tortured people who find no rest. It is horrifying to note that even in the face of 3 decades of reports of horrific staff behavior and horrific unsanitary conditions, no attempt was made by the authorities to change anything. It was not until the late 1990s that a thorough investigation was conducted and, after a shocking report by investigators, a decision was made to close down this horrible place. For many years, the Barbary Psychiatric Clinic remained empty, becoming a mecca for Satanists who conducted their rituals there. The incredibly interesting, but at the same time the most mysterious and macabre religion of the world, the religion of Voodoo, originated and became most widespread in the West African republics. According to historians, Voodoo is derived from the oldest religion on Earth, which emerged along with the birth of African civilization. The city of Lomé, the capital of the African Republic of Togo, is home to perhaps one of the creepiest places on the planet, where voodoo adepts from all over the world flock. The so-called Akadesawa market, the main magical market on the planet. There are numerous rows with frightening merchandise, bones, firewood, potions, severed heads and limbs of wild animals, and much more. The long wooden stalls are littered with piles of heads, tails, skin pulled off, and other most unimaginable and frightening goods. Wizards from all over Africa search here for ingredients for their terrible rituals, but in addition to wizards, hundreds of ordinary people roam the market looking for solutions to their everyday problems. Some people want to be cured of an illness, some want to become stronger and more enduring, and some want to put a spell on their enemy. The seller will make 3 deep cuts on his chest or back, and at the same time the sufferer rubs himself with a healing powder of the most dubious quality, and after smoking a certain type of smoking mixture, the person goes on a trip. He ceases to control himself and begins to see hallucinations. Often people see their future. The impression from these substances is so realistic that virtual reality is just a child's plaything compared to the magic of voodoo potions, but also the consequences of such acts can be most dire for a person. It is not for nothing that the term zombie is so firmly associated with the practice of voodoo. Pauelia is an island of the dead, the gateway to hell, one of the creepiest and most chilling places on the planet. It all began in the 15th century, when the plague was raging at its peak in Europe. Cities were littered with corpses that could not be buried in time. Decomposing bodies spread stench and contagion, and it was then that Pauwels was remembered, making it a kind of isolator for plague victims. To stop the epidemic, not only corpses were brought to the island, but also living, stricken people, left there alone with their death, without help. People, including children and women, were thrown into pits with their bodies or burned alive to stop the plague by fire. According to conservative estimates, over 160,000 infected people were killed here, but despite its notoriety in the 20th century, the island was again used to forcibly isolate people. In 1922, a psychiatric hospital for the mentally ill was opened here, where enemies of the current fascist regime of Benito Mussolini were admitted. The head doctor of the place was given carte blanche to conduct the most sophisticated experiments on his subjects, using the latest methods of treatment that were more reminiscent of medieval torture. Clinic patients often complained of hearing strange whispers, groans, and cries, and even screams at night. Some forced residents of the island saw people appear out of nowhere and burn up before their eyes, turning into a pile of ash. All of these events went unnoticed until hospital staff began to hear and see the same things as the patients. The head doctor died 2 years later, falling from the bell tower, and the circumstances of his death are still unresolved. Either he committed suicide in a fit of madness, or he was thrown down by madmen who were tired of tolerating his sadistic experiments. The island of Paualia is now closed to tourists and is heavily guarded against unauthorized intrusion. The few who have managed to bypass the guards and get to the island unanimously assert that the most real evil lives on Poveglia and strongly advise not even to try to get there. In the Sicilian city of Palermo, under the Cathedral of St. Mary, is one of the creepiest places on the planet, the Capuchin Catacombs. In contrast to any other catacombs, the whole interior of the Catacombs of St. Mary is composed only of mummified and embalmed bodies, because for a long time catacombs were considered the most elite cemetery, where they buried the most worthy and famous people. The tradition of burying people in the catacombs dates back to the 16th century. The first Capuchin monk was buried there as early as 1599. It turned out that the special composition of the soil and atmosphere in the catacombs slows down organic processes and interrupts the decomposition of bodies. Before burial, the dead were dried in special chambers for 8 months and then hung or laid out along the wall or in special niches. Not only monks were buried in the catacombs, but also some of the most generous benefactors of the monastery. At that time, it was a great honor for any layman to be buried in the crypt of St. Mary's. The crypt eventually became cramped and the Capuchins began to dig long corridors to bury more and more bodies. Although there was a ban on open burials in 1837, relatives of the deceased circumvented the ban by leaving windows in the coffins that allowed them to see the body. The most horrible burials in the catacombs are the mummies of children, some of which have remained in near-perfect condition for decades. The ancestors of many of the city's famous living people are buried in the catacombs, and on Memorial Day, the descendants of those whose mummies are on public display descend into the catacombs. Pompeii was destroyed by the volcanic eruption of Vesuvius in 79 AD, during which thousands of people died. It was not until the late 18th century that the city was discovered, and what a surprise it was when scientists found perfectly preserved buildings, household items, food, and frozen human corpses. Initially, the strange statues, which did not conform to ancient canons, puzzled archaeologists, but when one such statue was accidentally cracked open and human remains were found inside it, everything fell into place. Hundreds of human tragedies were frozen in the stone. In one street, a couple was found, a woman, judging by the folds of her clothes, pregnant, and a man, trying to cover himself with his hands from the pieces of pinza falling from the sky. A mother and her 3 children were found in one of the houses. The children did not even have time to wake up. People were huddled together, trying to shield themselves with their hands from the ash. Many ran to the pier, and some lucky people managed to sail far enough to avoid being burned alive and suffocated in the ash. Nowadays, Pompeii has become an open-air museum of antiquity. Anyone can visit this gruesome monument of world history and see the frozen tragedy of the past with his own eyes. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and write what you think about it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to me.